The ghost in the rain. The day my husband died, everyone cried. They held my hands, pressed warm cups of tea into my trembling palms, and spoke in muted, delicate whispers as if grief were something made of fine glass that might shatter if spoken too loudly. His mother held me in the church parlor while rain pounded against the stained glass windows, telling me that God took the best ones early. His friends from the firm stood in solemn rows, dressed in immaculate black suits, shaking their heads at the tragic waste of a brilliant 34-year-old life. 3 months later, I saw him buying flowers for another woman. I have never believed in ghosts. I am a woman of logic, a woman who spent her career analyzing balance sheets and legal contracts, where numbers either add up or they don't, where facts do not bend to emotion. Death was a biological fact. A car going 70 miles an hour over the barrier of the Blackwood Bridge. An explosion. A fire so intense that the metal frame of his sedan melted into the asphalt. I attended his funeral 93 days ago. I stood beside an oak coffin, felt the cold mud beneath my shoes at the cemetery, and watched 3 feet of dark earth settle over the polished brass nameplate that bore his name, Daniel Carter. Yet there he was. It was a Tuesday afternoon, heavy with the gray, humid mist that often hangs over the downtown shopping district before a downpour. I was standing near the entrance of a coffee shop, holding an untouched paper cup, waiting for the light to change, so I could cross the boulevard. Across the 4 lanes of crawling traffic, a man stepped out of a high-end florist shop. My breath hitched in my throat. The paper cup slipped slightly in my grip, hot coffee sloshing over my knuckles, but I didn't feel the burn. It wasn't just someone who looked like Daniel. It was Daniel. The same broad shoulders tapering into a lean frame. The same distinct, slightly asymmetrical gait as he stepped off the curb. The same dark brown hair, trimmed neatly at the nape of his neck, with that unmistakable pale scar running just above his left eyebrow, the souvenir from a childhood bicycle crash he had told me about on our second date. I watched, paralyzed, as he paused at the edge of the sidewalk. He reached down with his left hand, tapped the face of his leather wristwatch twice, and adjusted the strap. It was a habit he had performed every single morning of the 7 years we were married. Whenever he was anxious, whenever he was making a transition from one space to another, he adjusted his watch. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. The noise of the city, the blaring taxi horns, the hiss of bus brakes, the chatter of pedestrians rushing past me with opened umbrellas, faded into a dull, distant hum. "You're losing your mind," my inner voice screamed at me. "Grief is playing tricks on you. You're hallucinating." Then, he turned his head toward the street light. The gray afternoon light caught his profile sharply. There was no mistake. There was no twin brother. Daniel was an only child. There was no optical illusion. It was my husband. He was holding a massive bouquet of white lilies, tied with a silver ribbon. A smile rested on his lips, a light, effortless smile that looked completely unfamiliar to me. In the final 6 months before his death, Daniel had been a man weighed down by invisible anvils. He had slept poorly, staring at the ceiling until 3 in the morning, starting at every unexpected notification on his phone, snapping at the smallest distractions. The man standing across the street looked completely unburdened, rested, reborn. A woman walked out of the florist shop behind him. She was in her mid-30s, dressed casually in a beige trench coat, her light brown hair tied into a loose, unpretentious ponytail. She carried a small canvas tote bag over one shoulder and held the hand of a little girl who couldn't have been more than 4 or 5 years old. The little girl pointed at the flowers in Daniel's hand. Daniel laughed, a sound I hadn't heard in years, and leaned down. He picked up the little girl with one arm, balancing her effortlessly on his hip, and presented one of the white lilies to her. She took it, giggling, and buried her face in the petals. The woman smiled at Daniel, reaching out to gently smooth down the collar of his jacket. Daniel leaned in and kissed her softly on the cheek. The traffic light turned green. A crowd of pedestrians surged past me, blocking my view for a few excruciating seconds. "Excuse me," someone grunted, bumping my shoulder. "Daniel!" The name left my lips as a dry, broken whisper. When the pedestrian crowd cleared, the trio was moving toward the corner. Daniel was carrying the child, his arm wrapped affectionately around the woman's waist as they waited to cross the side street. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to run across the street, to grab his arm, to scream his name until my lungs tore. I wanted to force him to look at me. I wanted to watch his eyes widen in terror as the dead returned to claim an explanation. But something held me back. A cold, sharp blade of intuition buried itself deep in my stomach. If Daniel Carter was alive, then his death was not an accident. If his death was not an accident, then the closed casket, the sealed police reports, the rapid cremation of the remains found in the wreckage, all of it had been staged. And if he had spent months or years planning to erase his existence, what would he do if he realized his grieving widow was standing 50 feet away, watching him play father to another family? My hand stopped shaking. The shock that had frozen my blood began to melt, replaced by a dark, crystallizing clarity. My husband had not died in a burning car on Blackwood Bridge. He had simply erased me. He had taken our home, our 7 years of shared history, my love, my trust, and my youth, and he had tossed them into the trash like an old coat he no longer needed. He had let me sit in an empty house for 3 months, weeping until my eyes bled, drowning in a sea of guilt and loss, while he moved into a second life with a new woman and a child. I stood behind a large steel newsstand, pulling my dark scarf up over my chin, lowering the brim of my hat. I watched as Daniel carried the little girl toward a sleek silver sedan parked near the end of the block. He unlocked the doors with a key fob, opened the rear door, and carefully buckled the child into a car seat. The woman climbed into the passenger side. Daniel walked around to the driver's side, paused for half a second to sweep his eyes casually down the street, checking his surroundings out of pure muscle memory, and got in. The engine turned over. The brake lights flickered red against the wet pavement. I stepped out from behind the newsstand and raised my hand toward a yellow taxi creeping through the traffic. The cab pulled up to the curb. I opened the door, slid onto the cold vinyl seat, and pointed directly at the silver sedan as it pulled out into the lane. "Follow that silver car," I said. My voice didn't sound like my own. It was flat, hard, and devoid of fear. The driver glanced at me in the rearview mirror, his brow furrowing at the expression on my face. "Lady, follow them," I repeated, pulling $100 bill from my purse and dropping it into the front tray. "Keep 3 cars between us. Don't lose them." The driver looked at the money, then back at me, nodding slowly. He shifted the taxi into drive. As we pulled out into the rain, following the red tail lights of the man I had buried 93 days ago, I knew my old life was officially over. I wasn't a widow anymore. I was a ghost following a living man. And whatever secret Daniel Carter was hiding was about to cost him everything he had built.
The ride felt like a descent into another world. For 45 minutes, the yellow cab trailed the silver sedan through the heart of the city, watching its red brake lights flash through the rain. The familiar, towering glass skyscrapers of the business district slowly gave way to wide, tree-lined avenues, then to quiet, affluent suburban streets lined with manicured lawns and stately 2-story homes. This was Oak Ridge, an exclusive neighborhood on the outer edge of the metropolitan area. It was a district I had only ever read about in real estate magazines, a sanctuary built for wealthy professionals who wanted privacy and distance from the rest of the world. The silver sedan signaled left and turned into a long gravel driveway, coming to a stop in front of a stunning white colonial-style house with dark blue shutters and a broad, welcoming porch. "Pull over here," I whispered to the taxi driver, tapping his shoulder. "Behind that black SUV." The cab driver pulled over to the curb 2 houses down, idling the engine. He glanced back at me through the mirror, his eyes filled with a mixture of curiosity and concern. "Everything all right, miss? You look like you've seen a ghost." "I have," I said quietly, my eyes locked on the house. "Just give me a minute." Through the rain-streaked window of the cab, I watched the scene unfold like a silent movie. The silver car's doors opened. Daniel stepped out, holding a large black umbrella over the passenger side. He helped the woman step out, wrapping his arm around her shoulders to keep her dry. Then he reached into the back seat, unbuckled the little girl, and lifted her high into the air. The child giggled, kicking her little legs in excitement, her arms wrapping tightly around Daniel's neck. Daniel laughed, a rich, booming sound that carried across the quiet street, and kissed the top of her head. My chest caved in. A physical, nauseating ache bloomed behind my ribs. During our 7 years of marriage, Daniel had made one thing explicitly clear: he did not want children. Every time the topic came up, every time I brought up starting a family, buying a bigger house, or planning for the future, he shut it down instantly. Children bring chaos, Emma, he used to tell me in his calm, measured tone. Staring at me across the dinner table. They tie you down. They create vulnerabilities. I want it to just be you and me. I don't want anything else distracting us. I had believed him. I had suppressed my own desire to be a mother because I loved him. Because I thought I was protecting his peace. Yet here he was, in the middle of a rain-drenched afternoon. Playing the devoted, doting father to a child who couldn't have been older than 4. A child who was born while we were still married. The woman unlocked the front door of the White House. The little girl ran inside, her laughter echoing down the hallway. Daniel followed them, carrying grocery bags and the bouquet of white lilies, kicking the heavy wooden door shut with his heel. A light clicked on in the living room window. Through the sheer lace curtains, I saw Daniel set the groceries on a kitchen island, pour 2 glasses of wine, and hand one to the woman. She leaned in, pressed her forehead against his, and smiled. Home. This wasn't a temporary hiding spot. This wasn't a mistress's apartment or a clandestine rendezvous. This was an established, comfortable, deeply rooted life. Miss. The cab driver called out gently, breaking my trance. The meter's running. Are we waiting or are we going back? I felt a cold tear escape my eye, tracing a path down my cheek before I could wipe it away. Take me back, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Take me back to the city. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the hardwood floor of my living room, surrounded by cardboard boxes I had packed away 3 weeks after the funeral. Boxes labeled Daniel's Seal Hess, Daniel's Papers, Daniel's Bouquets. When the police had come to my door 93 days ago, they had been gentle. 2 detectives in wet raincoats had stood in my hallway, looking at the floor as they delivered the news. Mrs. Carter, there was a severe accident on Blackwood Bridge at approximately 11:15 p.m. Your husband's vehicle lost control, breached the barrier, and detonated upon impact at the bottom of the ravine. The fire was extreme. We recovered what we could, but identification had to be made through dental records provided by his clinic. I remembered screaming. I remembered collapsing onto the rug, my world shattering into 1,000 jagged pieces. I remembered the funeral director asking me if I wanted an open or closed casket. Given the condition of the remains, Mrs. Carter, the director had advised softly, closed casket service would be much more dignified. I had agreed. I had signed every paper they put in front of me without reading them through my tears. I had accepted the sealed wooden box, paid the funeral bills, and buried an empty shell. Now, sitting on the floor surrounded by his old belongings, I began to look at everything through a new, ruthless lens. I pulled out his old accordion folder of documents. I began spreading them out across the floorboards. Tax returns from the last 3 years, car insurance policies, life insurance documents. My hand stopped on a blue folder. 2 months before his accident, Daniel had quietly transferred ownership of our house solely into my name. At the time, he had claimed it was for tax protection purposes, related to his legal firm. He had also taken out a heavy life insurance policy, $2 million, naming me as the sole beneficiary. The money had been paid out 6 weeks after the funeral. It was sitting in my bank account right now, untouched. He paid me off, I realized, a sickening wave of horror washing over me. He gave me a house and $2 million so I wouldn't starve, so I wouldn't raise a fuss, so I would quietly disappear into my grief, while he started over. He hadn't just faked his death. He had orchestrated an exit strategy. I stood up, walked over to my laptop, and opened a browser. My fingers flew across the keyboard as I began searching the public records database for the county police department. I typed in the incident report number from his crash day 26, BC0912. A warning prompt popped up on the screen, Restricted Coad. This file has been sealed by order of the State Superior Court. Access is restricted to authorized legal personnel only. My brow furrowed. Why would a routine traffic fatality report be sealed by a court order? I opened another tab and searched for the medical examiner's report from the county coroner's office. Fields State U.S. ARCADA sealed. Every single official document surrounding Daniel Carter's death had been locked away behind legal iron curtains. A normal car accident doesn't produce sealed court files. A normal car accident doesn't involve dental record verifications that bypass the family's independent review. Someone with massive influence, someone inside the legal or political system, had helped him pull this off. The next afternoon, I returned to Oak Ridge. I had rented a nondescript gray sedan under my maiden name, replacing my car so Daniel wouldn't recognize it if he happened to look out the window. I parked 3 doors down from the White House, pulling a pair of compact binoculars from my bag. I waited. At 40:30 p.m., the front door opened. The brown-haired woman walked out, leading the little girl by the hand. They got into a blue compact car and drove away, likely headed to a neighborhood park or an after-school activity. Daniel remained inside. At 5:10 p.m., a large black SUV with heavily tinted windows turned onto the street. It didn't pull into the driveway. It pulled up to the curb directly in front of the White House, and idling its engine with a low, guttural rumble. The front door of the house opened immediately. Daniel stepped out onto the porch. He was wearing a dark suit, his expression cold and vigilant. He didn't look like the happy, laughing father I had seen yesterday. He looked tense, his shoulders squared, his jaw tight. A man stepped out of the rear passenger side of the black SUV. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in an immaculate Italian-cut suit, with sharp gray hair slicked back from his forehead, even from 50 yards away. Through my binoculars, the man radiated an aura of immense, quiet authority. Daniel walked down the porch steps to meet him at the edge of the lawn. They began to speak. I couldn't hear their voices, but their body language spoke volumes. Daniel was gesturing sharply, his face flushed with anger or anxiety. The man in the suit remained completely still, listening with a cold, unbothered expression. Then, the man in the suit reached inside his jacket. My heart slammed against my ribs. Is he pulling a gun? Instead, the stranger pulled out a thick, manila envelope and held it out toward Daniel. Daniel looked at the envelope as if it contained poison. He shook his head, stepping back, refusing to take it. The man in the suit didn't flinch. He stepped forward, closing the distance between them, and grabbed Daniel by the lapel of his jacket. The grip was tight, violent, and precise. The stranger leaned in close, whispering something directly into Daniel's ear. Daniel froze, all the color drained from his face. The defiance in his posture collapsed instantly, leaving him looking smaller, hollowed out. Slowly, reluctantly, Daniel reached out and took the manila envelope. The stranger patted Daniel's cheek twice, a gesture that looked less like affection and more like a terrifying display of dominance, turned on his heel, and climbed back into the rear seat of the SUV. The black vehicle accelerated down the street and vanished around the corner. Daniel remained standing on the lawn alone, staring down at the manila envelope in his hands. His breathing was heavy, his chest heaving under his suit jacket. Suddenly, he turned his head sharply toward the street, directly in the direction of my parked car. Panic seized me. I dropped the binoculars into my lap and ducked beneath the dashboard, pressing my back flat against the leather seat. My heart hammered in my ears like a war drum. Did he see me? Did he spot the lens flare? I held my breath, listening to the quiet patter of rain on the roof of the car. 10 seconds passed. 20, 30. Slowly, inch by inch, I peeked over the edge of the window frame. The lawn was empty. The front door of the White House was closed. I sat up, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, gasping for air. My husband hadn't just faked his death to run away with another woman. He hadn't just abandoned me for a fresh start. He was entangled with dangerous, powerful people. He was bound to someone who could grab him by the collar in broad daylight on a quiet suburban street and force him into compliance. And whatever was inside that manila envelope was the reason Daniel Carter had to die, and why a man named Julian Vance had taken his place. I pulled my phone out of my purse, opened a fresh notes file and typed JT the White House on Maple Street, Ku East Taiwan. Who is the man in the black SUV? Guel, find out what is inside that house. I put the car in drive and pulled away from the curb. The grieving widow was officially gone. The investigation had begun. The night was cold, draped in a heavy, unforgiving silence that seemed to amplify every thrum of my pulse. I sat in my parked car 2 streets away from the White House, staring through the rain-streaked windshield. In my lap lay a small leather pouch containing 3 basic lockpicks, a set I had purchased online 2 days ago after watching dozens of instructional videos until my eyes burned. I was no longer Emma, the grieving widow who spent her evenings weeping over framed photographs. That woman had died 93 days ago beside an empty grave. The woman sitting here tonight was driven by an obsession so raw, so consuming, that it swallowed every lingering drop of fear. At 9:00 p.m., the lights inside the house began to turn off one by one. I watched from the shadows near the tree line as the silver sedan pulled out of the driveway. Daniel was behind the wheel alone. He sped off into the night, likely returning to whatever dark errand the man in the black suit had demanded of him. Through the curtained windows of the ground floor, I saw the silhouette of the brown-haired woman. She was carrying the little girl upstairs, leading her toward the bedrooms. 10 minutes later, the second floor lights dimmed, leaving only a single porch light cutting through the drizzle. This is it, I told myself. There is no turning back. I stepped out into the damp night, pulling my dark hood low over my face. My boots made no sound on the wet grass as I navigated around the side of the house. Avoiding the front porch, I moved toward the back patio, where a set of French doors led into what appeared to be a home office. My hands shook violently as I knelt before the brass lock of the patio door. Rain trickled down the back of my neck, but I barely felt the chill. I inserted the tension wrench in the pick, exactly as I had practiced. Clicked. The sound was shockingly loud in the quiet yard. My heart leaped into my throat. I held my breath, waiting for an alarm to blare or footsteps to rush down the stairs. Nothing. Only the soft patter of rain against the glass. I turned the handle gently, slipped inside, and closed the door behind me. The air inside smelled of fresh paint, cedar, and the distinct, agonizingly familiar scent of Daniel's expensive sandalwood cologne. For a brief second, nostalgia threatened to paralyze me. I could almost hear his laughter echoing through our old apartment, could almost feel his arms around me. Focus, I scolded myself, biting the inside of my cheek until I tasted copper. He is not your husband. Daniel Carter is a ghost. I clicked on a small penlight, casting a narrow beam of illumination across the room. It was a classic study, mahogany bookshelves, a heavy oak desk, and framed architectural prints on the walls. I began searching the desk drawers. They were filled with mundane items, stationery, spare pens, paper clips, tax forms for a local landscaping business under the name Julian Vance. Julian Vance. So that was the name he was using now. I ran my fingers along the back panel of the bottom drawer, searching for a hidden latch, something I knew Daniel always favored. In our old home, he had built a secret compartment inside our hallway closet to store our emergency savings. He was a creature of habit. A man who faked his death couldn't erase his ingrained tendencies. Sure enough, my fingers brushed against a tiny wooden lip beneath the bottom drawer. I pressed it firmly. With a soft metallic snap, the false bottom popped upward. My breath caught. Inside the hidden compartment lay 3 pristine, official-looking passports. I picked up the first one. It was a navy blue U.S. passport featuring Daniel's face, but the name read Julian Vance. I picked up the second one. Same face. A different hair color, a deep dark brown, under the name David Miller, issued by the Canadian government. Then I picked up the third passport. It was older, worn around the edges. Issued 10 years ago, 3 years before I even met Daniel. The photo showed a younger, harder-looking version of my husband. The name on the passport wasn't Daniel Carter, nor was it Julian Vance. It read Victor Sterling. My mind reeled. Daniel Carter hadn't just created a fake identity to escape me. Daniel Carter was the fake identity. My entire 7-year marriage had been built on a foundation of air and lives. The man I had loved, the man I had cooked for, slept beside, and built a life with had never existed. I had married a shadow who had borrowed a name. Deep within the hidden compartment lay a thick, black leather-bound ledger, and a heavy steel key attached to a brass tag. The tag was stamped with a logo and a number: First National Vault and Trust, Locker 488. I opened the ledger. Page after page was filled with meticulous, handwritten entries, dates, wire transfer numbers, routing codes, and astronomical sums of money moving through offshore accounts in Panama, the Cayman Islands, and Zurich. My eyes scanned the columns until they landed on a date from 4 months ago, just 3 weeks before Daniel's accident. Transaction ID FEN 8809X source, Sterling Holdings lead. Destination escrow account the 4192 amount of $500 memo identity termination and erasure services, $12.5 million. He hadn't just faked a car crash. He had paid an enterprise a fortune to stage his death, bribe coroners, seal public records, and engineer a brand new life. And then my eyes drifted to a folded piece of paper tucked into the back cover of the ledger. It was a printout of an internal police dossier, stamped with a red, restricted seal. The file belonged to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Subject Victor Sterlius Daniel Carter, Julian Vance's status, key informant, former asset, syndicate financial network not subject, has provided state's evidence against the Moretti crime family. Under active federal protection protocol. I stared at the paper, the penlight shaking wildly in my grip. He wasn't just a fraud. He was a federal informant hiding from a ruthless syndicate. And then, at the bottom of the page, handwritten in blue ink in Daniel's familiar, elegant cursive, was a short list of names under the header Collateral Losses. The first name on the list was mine, Emma Carter. Beside my name was a checkbox, marked with a neat, blue checkmark. Beneath it was a brief note in his handwriting. Subject Emma Carter successfully neutralized via grief framework. No threat of inquiry. Emotional profile suggests complete compliance and isolation. A cold, razor-sharp realization sliced through my heart. He hadn't just left me behind to protect me. He had analyzed me. He had used my love, my devotion, and my grief as a tool to keep me quiet, assuming I would simply shut down, mourn him forever, and never ask a single question. I wasn't his beloved wife. I was a liability he had managed with psychological precision. Suddenly, the floorboards above my head creaked. I froze, snapping the ledger shut and turning off the penlight. Darkness engulfed me. Soft, slow footsteps echoed from the ceiling, moving toward the staircase. The woman was coming downstairs. Panic surged like adrenaline through my veins. I shoved the ledger and the passports back into the compartment, but in my haste, my elbow struck a glass paperweight on the desk. It rolled off the wood and shattered onto the hard floor. The footsteps on the stairs instantly stopped. "Julian." A woman's voice called out from the hallway above, laced with sleep and suspicion. "Is that you?" I pressed myself flat against the side of the mahogany desk, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I was certain she would hear it. The footsteps resumed, faster this time, descending. The carpeted stairs descending the carpeted stairs. A little fetty door, I looked toward French doors behind me, they were unlocked. But stepping out onto the wet patio would mean breaking the silence. The door handle to the study began to turn. I slipped out through the patio doors just as the study light clicked on. I didn't look back. I sprinted across the wet grass, vaulted over the low wooden fence, and didn't stop running until I reached my car 2 streets away. I slammed the door, locked it, and leaned my forehead against the cold steering wheel, gasping for air. Rain pounded against the roof like 1,000 tiny drums. I raised my right hand. Clutched tightly in my palm was the heavy steel key-stamped locker 408 and the third passport, the one belonging to Victor Sterling. I looked at the passport photo of the stranger I had spent 7 years loving. Tears of betrayal welled in my eyes, but they didn't fall. The sadness inside me was burning away, leaving behind a cold, hard ember of absolute fury. He had given himself a second life. He had turned my grief into his ultimate cover story. I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. My eyes were clear, sharp, and stripped of all innocence. "You wanted to die, Daniel," I whispered to the empty car. "I'm going to make sure you stay dead." The next morning, the city was shrouded in a thick gray fog. The rain had stopped, leaving behind an eerie stillness that hung over the concrete and steel. At 9:00 a.m. sharp, I walked into the grand lobby of First National Vault and Trust, located in the heart of the financial district. I was wearing an oversized trench coat, dark sunglasses, and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over my brow. In my purse lay the heavy steel key-stamped locker 408, and the worn passport belonging to Victor Sterling. The vault officer, a silver-haired man with a stoic expression, examined the key, checked the signature ledger, and ran the passport through his system. "Locker 408, he said neutrally, handing back the credentials. "Follow me, ma'am." He led me down a carpeted spiral staircase into a subterranean vault lined with thousands of gleaming stainless steel boxes. He inserted his master key into the left lock of box 408, and I inserted the key I had stolen from Daniel's study into the right. With a heavy, echoing metallic clunk, the vault door swung open. "I'll leave you to your privacy," the officer said, stepping out of the room and pulling the heavy door closed behind him. I pulled the long metal drawer out from the wall and set it down on a polished wooden viewing table. Inside lay a black, military-grade hard-shell briefcase. I popped the heavy latches. My breath caught in my throat. The briefcase was packed tight with stacks of $100 bills, neatly bound in paper bands bearing the seal of international banks. Next to the cash lay an encrypted satellite phone, a flash drive wrapped in black electrical tape, and a small, silver velvet box. I opened the velvet box. Inside rested a stunning, vintage diamond necklace, an heirloom that Daniel had told me years ago was stolen from his family during a burglary when he was a teenager. He had lied about that too. It wasn't stolen. It had been sitting in this vault, waiting for his second life. I picked up the flash drive. On it, etched in fine white letters, was a single word more TI. This was his insurance policy. This was the raw, unredacted financial evidence Victor Sterling had stolen from the syndicate before faking his death. The leverage he was using to force the FBI to protect him, while keeping the crime family at bay. In that quiet, subterranean vault, a terrifying realization came over me. Daniel had built an impenetrable fortress of lies. He had used the legal system, federal protection, and my own pure grief to construct his freedom. To tear it down, I couldn't go to the police. The police had sealed his records. The FBI was covering his tracks. To destroy a monster, I had to use his own fire. I closed the briefcase, pulled out the flash drive, the satellite phone, and 3 stacks of $100 bills, and slipped them into my tote bag. I walked out of the bank into the crisp morning air, took a deep breath, and powered on the encrypted satellite phone. The phone had only 3 contacts saved in its memory. 2 were listed as alphanumeric codes. The third was simply labeled handlers. I bypassed the handlers. Instead, I opened the phone's browser, accessed a secure network directory saved in the bookmarks, and located an unlisted phone number associated with an estate in Chicago, the headquarters of the Moretti crime syndicate. My fingers trembled for a fraction of a second over the dial button. If you do this, a voice inside me whispered, you can never undo it. You are stepping across a line from which no one ever returns. I thought of the list in the ledger. I thought of the checkbox beside my name. Subject Emma Carter successfully neutralized via grief framework. I pressed dial. The phone rang twice. A deep, gravelly voice answered. Speak. I have something that belongs to you, I said, my voice steady, cold, and stripped of all hesitation. A long pause on the other end. Who is this? It doesn't matter who I am, I replied. What matters is that Victor Sterling is alive. He is living in a white house on Maple Street in Oak Ridge. Under the name Julian Vance. Silence hung heavy over the satellite connection. And why are you giving us this? The gravelly voice asked softly, dangerously. Because he discarded me, I said, every word hitting with absolute finality. And because he assumed I was too broken to strike back. In 10 minutes, an anonymous package containing his encryption keys will arrive at federal police headquarters. If you want him before his agents move him again, you have 1 hour. Where is the flash drive? I am dropping it in a trash bin outside the central train station in 5 minutes. I said, come collect it. And do whatever you want with Victor Sterling. I hung up before he could respond. I walked to the train station, dropped the flash drive wrapped in tape into the designated bin, and threw the satellite phone down a storm drain. Then, I drove back to Oak Ridge. I parked the gray sedan on a quiet hill overlooking the White House on Maple Street. I sat in my car, wrapped tightly in my coat, watching the clock on the dashboard. 11:42 m, a sleek black SUV, the same one I had seen days prior, pulled up to the curb in front of the house. 3 men in dark suits stepped out. They didn't knock. They kicked the heavy front door off its hinges and stormed inside. Screams echoed faintly across the quiet street. 2 minutes later, the men emerged. They were dragging Daniel out into the driveway. His shirt was torn, his face bruised, his hands bound behind his back. He was shouting, pleading, looking frantically down the empty suburban street for help that would never arrive. His federal safety net had been shredded. His leverage was sitting in a trash bin at the train station. His secret was completely exposed. As they shoved him toward the back of the SUV, Daniel turned his head. Through the tinted glass of my windshield, high up on the hill, his eyes locked onto mine. Distance separated us, but I knew he saw me. He saw the grieving widow he had buried. He saw the collateral loss, standing above him on the ridge, watching his destruction unfold. His eyes widened in sheer, unadulterated terror. For the first time in his life, he realized who had orchestrated his downfall. It wasn't the FBI. It wasn't the mob. It was the woman whose life he had treated as a footnote. The SUV doors slammed shut. The tires screeched against the wet asphalt, and the vehicle sped away, vanishing into the fog. Silence returned to Maple Street. I sat in the quiet of my car for a long time, staring at the empty driveway. I pulled out my phone, dialed my own home voicemail, and listened to the recording I had saved 3 months ago. The final voice message Daniel had left me the morning before his staged crash. Hey honey, just heading into a late meeting. I love you. See you tonight. I pressed 0. Message deleted. I turned the key in the ignition and shifted the car into drive. As I pulled away from Oak Ridge, I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror one last time. Daniel had faked his death to buy himself a second life. And to claim my own freedom, I had committed my very first sin. I turned onto the highway, heading toward a horizon that belonged entirely to me.